Chapter 14. Isabella stood in front of the door to the great hall with Jack at her side. "Are you certain this is what you want to do?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As much as she longed just to run away in the night, away from Berwick, away from her duty to Hugh and from her father's pain, her conscience bade her stay to say goodbye.
"Wait,"
she said when Jack reached for the handle. She gathered her hair and knotted it at the nape of her neck. Then she squared her shoulders and drew a deep breath.
"I am ready now."
Jack swung the door wide. She stepped through. The high dais was empty. She knew her father had retired to the solar for the night. A pang stabbed at her heart as she pictured him there, alone with his misery. She shook her head, forcing her mind to stay focused. First, she had to deal with Hugh, who was sitting with Quinn and the other monks at one of the long tables. A sad smile tugged at her lips as she watched him throw his head back, his easy laughter ringing out at something the abbot had said. She would always love Hugh. He was her dearest friend, a brother to her soul, but she was never meant to be his wife. Her stomach twisted as she set off across the room. He looked up when she approached the table. Concern instantly furrowed his brow. He rose. "Bella, what has happened to you?" His fingertips reached out, tucking a wayward lock of her hair behind her ear. She ignored his question, not wishing to explain that her wimple was in tatters on the stable floor.
"May we speak?"
she said, her voice low.
"In private."
The concern she had glimpsed in his eyes changed to wariness. His shoulders stiffened. Nodding, he gestured for her to go in front of him. Jack watched as Bella turned stiffly on her heel. Hugh shot him a suspicious look before he followed after her. Together, they disappeared behind the screen at the rear of the high dais. Abbot Matthew cleared his throat, drawing Jack's gaze. "Don't look at me like that," Jack says as he turned away from the abbot's stern eyes. "Ready your swords," the older man said dryly. "You're a fool if you think he'll give her up without a fight." "I should have stolen her when I had the chance," Jack muttered, his eyes trained on the screen. But Bella had assured him that neither her father nor Hugh would force her to stay.
"Remember who my mother was,"
she had said. At the time, he had bit his tongue, feeling he should not point out that, although her mother had been a commoner, she was also the daughter of a wealthy merchant, whereas he was a penniless thief. After some time, a door slammed. Jack rose when he heard the stomp of footsteps approach. He glanced at Quinn. "Do not interfere." Then he planted his feet wide, keeping his arms lax at his sides. He was the larger man by far. Still, he had resolved not to fight back against Hugh unless he threatened his very life. Hugh barreled around the screen and headed toward him with fists clenched, his veins straining against his neck. Jack stiffened, readying his body to absorb the fullness of Hugh's fury. Only steps away now, Hugh pulled back his fist, his nostrils flared. Jack closed his eyes the instant before Hugh's knuckles ploughed into his jaw. Pain shot through his skull. He fell back, landing hard on the ground. Heavy footfalls retreated through the hall, the noise pounding Jack's head. "You deserved that, didn't you?" Jack lifted his eyelids just enough to see Quinn standing above him. "Aye, that I did," he said, reaching out his hand. "Where did he go?" Quinn pulled him to his feet. "Back the way he came. I presume to try to convince Bella to forget your common thieving Scottish hide." Jack shook his head, then winced, regretting the action. "Now what do we do?" Quinn asked. "I do not ken," Jack snapped. "'Tis not every day I steal a lady from her betrothed." He found a seat on one of the benches. "I suppose we wait for Bella now." After what felt like an age to Jack's throbbing head, though it had really been just a matter of minutes, Bella came out from behind the screen with her father and Hugh in tow. Her pain-stricken eyes locked with his. He started toward her, but then the doors to the hall burst open. A man, who emanated authority, but appeared to have fewer than 40 years to his credit, stormed into the room with 2 guards at his side. His velvet mantle swished about his hips as he turned to scan the hall. His lip curled with open disgust.
"Lord Percy, I did not grant you entry."
Surprised, Jack glanced back at Isabella's father, whose voice had echoed off the ceiling. Lord Redesdale stepped in front of Bella, as if shielding her. His eyes flashed with anger. Jack could not believe his transformation from frail shadow to defender. Jack swung back around and eyed the intruder. Even he had heard of Lord Percy, who was counted among King Edward's favoured advisers. Lord Percy's pale blue eyes narrowed on Lord Redesdale with naked contempt.
"You were remiss in not sending word of your daughter's return," he said. "I had to hear it from a servant."
The word servant flicked off his tongue as if expelling a disease from his body. Bella's father stepped forward.
"No more remiss than the king not sending me word straight away of her attack."
Lord Percy's eyes flashed.
"How dare you reprimand the king?" "I will, when his folly pertains to my daughter,"
Lord Redesdale shot back. Lord Percy gave pause. Then a cocky smile slowly spread his lips wide.
"I will not lie, David. Even though you chased away the messenger I sent last time I called for your support, I came here expecting a very different reception. Scottish peasants attacked your daughter. You should be at Berwick Castle as we speak, begging King Edward to retaliate."
Lord Redesdale gestured to Jack.
"Brother Peter witnessed the attack. He is convinced those responsible were not peasants, Scottish or otherwise."
Jack stepped forward to show his support for Isabella's father. Still, Lord Percy did not bother to glance his way. He stared hard at Lord Redesdale.
"Coward!" he spat. "If my daughter was attacked and her virtue assaulted, I would see those guilty brought to justice."
"Wait," Jack said, locking eyes with Lord Percy. "I told no one of her near rape." He stalked toward the English lord. "I intentionally left that detail out, thinking it would distress Lord Redesdale unnecessarily." Jack stopped a breath from the English lord. Images of fine swords and tattered clothing flashed in his mind.
"It was you," Jack snarled. "Those were your men, dressed to look like peasants." "Prove it," Lord Percy hissed. "I just did."
Jack grabbed his tunic and slammed his body into the wall. He shot a sidelong glance at Percy's men, but Quinn and the Redesdale guard had them surrounded.
"What of your vows, Brother Peter?"
Lord Percy sneered. A slow smile curved Jack's lips. He pressed his forearm hard against Lord Percy's throat, then leaned close and whispered in his ear, "I'm not a monk." From beneath his robe, Jack produced a dagger, the tip of which he jabbed against Percy's throat. "I'm a thief. My sins are many, and I don't mind adding your murder to the list." Lord Percy's eyes narrowed.
"You're one of the masked bandits who stole the girl from my men."
Jack shrugged. "You aren't in a good position to make accusations."
"Brother Peter, release him."
Jack glanced over his shoulder. Lord Redesdale stood behind him. His eyes held a feverish gleam. Jack moved aside but kept his dirk at the ready. Lord Redesdale stepped closer. "You ordered your men to attack and rape my daughter?" he said, his voice soft and deadly. Lord Percy spat on the ground.
"She is the daughter of a commoner, a whore whom you have mourned for the last 5 years, when you should have been at court paying homage to your king."
"My king?" Lord Redesdale said, as if he could not believe Lord Percy had dared to speak those words. Jack watched Lord Redesdale's hands curl into tight fists. His chest heaved.
"My king!"
Lord Redesdale's voice thundered off the high ceilings. He raised his clenched fists in the air, threw his head back and raged.
"He killed my wife! My heart!"
he cried, beating his chest with his own fist.
"He is no king!
He seized Lord Percy, throwing him to the floor and straddling him. He pulled his fist back and slammed it down, hammering Lord Percy's face again and again. Blood gushed from his nose and mouth and splattered the wall. Lord Redesdale snarled and grabbed Lord Percy's tunic with both hands, lifting his bloodied head off the ground.
I denounce him!
Lord Redesdale bellowed in his face.
Do you hear me? I denounce King Edward!
Lord Redesdale's chest heaved as he stood, dragging Percy toward the door.
Get out of my house!
One of the Redesdale guards grabbed Lord Percy from his lord's hands and tossed him at the feet of his men, who lifted him up and carried him from the hall. But before the door closed behind them, Lord Percy shouted,
I will see you drawn and quartered!
Doom closed in around Isabella, choking the breath from her lungs. She grabbed Jack's hand.
Why did he say that?
Jack raked his free hand through his hair. Your dad just announced King Edward. He's guilty of treason. You have to go. Isabella whirled around and looked at Hugh, who had spoken the rushed words. His hands gripped his hair. Terror had widened his eyes. You have to go, he said louder, coming toward her. It will not take Lord Percy long to gather his men. He will come back. You and your father will be arrested. You will be sent to the Tower, and your father will be put to death. The abbot came forward. I fear Lord Hugh is correct. The room started to spin.
Oh, God.
Her knees gave way, but Hugh caught her. Listen to me, Hugh said. You and your father must run. You cannot delay. Hugh turned to Jack. Ride north, and do not stop until you have run out of land. Edward will hunt for them. Hugh looked back to her. Tears stung her eyes. He pulled her close. I have never imagined life without you. If only I had. He shook his head. No, it is too late. He cupped her cheeks. Be Jack's, or someone else's. I don't care. I only care that you live. Promise me you will live. She nodded through her tears.
I promise,
she said, her heart pounding. Hugh drew a shaky breath and he stepped back. Then he turned to Jack. Do not delay. A moment later, Hugh was gone. Isabella gripped her stomach while she watched Hugh leave her house and her life forever. The room was spinning. Do not panic, Bella, Jack said, grabbing her shoulders. Swallowing down her tears, she nodded, gaining strength from his midnight eyes. She turned to her father. I do not regret what I said, Bella. His voice broke. I spoke the truth. A truth I have swallowed every day since the last time I brought your mother home. For the first time in years, her father's eyes shone bright and clear. A sob tore from her throat and she threw her arms around his neck. Listen to me, both of you. 'Tis imperative that we leave now, Jack said. She looked over her shoulder at Jack. Her eyes narrowed on the vein pulsing at his neck. She nodded, then turned back to her father. She took hold of his hands and brought them to her lips. Then she said,
Papa, we must go.
Lord Redesdale's eyes darted about the hall. But what of our home? Our things? Jack's fist came down hard on the table behind her, causing her to jump. They're no longer yours, he growled. The only possession you have now is your life and the lives of your daughters. Bella's heart sank.
Katerina.
She grabbed Jack's arm.
My sister's husband. He is not a kind man. There is no telling what he might do.
Jack squeezed her hand, then turned to Quinn. Ride to Ravensworth Castle and retrieve the Lady Katerina. Quinn nodded and bowed low to Isabella. Lifting his head, his dark eyes smiled up at her. Fear not, Bella. I will steal your sister away. Without another word, he turned on his heel and raced from the hall. Jack, Abbot Matthew said, we must hurry. We'll leave the wagon and help ourselves to Lord Redesdale's horses. Jack nodded and grabbed Isabella's elbow, pulling her toward the door.
Wait,
she said. Jack shook his head. No more delays, Bella.
But would not coin be helpful to us?
She said. He threw his hands up. Aye, coin is always helpful. She pressed a kiss to his lips, then turned to her father and reached into his pocket, retrieving a key.
I will be right back.
she said before racing from the hall and up the stairs to her father's solar. Unlocking the large chest beside his bed, she grabbed several bags of coin and her mother's jewels. Piling everything into a leather satchel, she swung the bag over her shoulder and raced back to the hall.
"We are ready, Jack,"
she said, barreling into the room. "Why does everyone keep calling him Jack?" her father said. "I thought his name was Brother Peter." Isabella grabbed his arm.
"I'll explain after we've escaped with our lives."
Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to enjoy more videos like this one, click the thumbs up button and subscribe to our channel. See you next time out in the Highlands.